Welcome to my channel. That's me. I'm Hannah. I'm kind of newish to posting on YouTube, and I want to make videos about art and wellness. I'm so happy you're here. Now, on to today's video. Like if you like, and subscribe. I really need a bigger, wider lens so you can see more of my background. He looks like a little llama, but he's actually a slug. So, do with that what you will. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah. I am 30 years old, soon to be 31. I am a person who lives with a schizophrenia spectrum disorder. I live with schizoaffective disorder specifically. And yeah, I was first diagnosed when I was 17, I think. And it's been a long journey to get to this point where I can have a coherent conversation and talk about my experience in a way that honestly makes sense to another individual. So welcome to my channel. I like to make videos about wellness and art and creativity and all things of that nature. So today I am going to be talking about some frequently asked questions about schizophrenia spectrum disorder, and from my perspective, from what I've learned over the years. I also worked in the field, so I've worked with a lot of people with the same illness as me. So I want to say, a very vast experience of having the illness, and also, you know, knowing and working with people that have the illness to whatever degree. And so there are some frequently asked questions. If you live in Canada, there's a really great resource online called the Schizophrenia Society, and they pretty much have one for each province, I'm pretty sure. In BC, it's the Schizophrenia Society of BC, and in Ontario, it's the Schizophrenia Society of Ontario, but they have really good resources on their website, and yeah, feel free to give that a Google. But they have 8 frequently asked questions, and then they have their answers, which is a really, like I said, great resource. I'm gonna be giving my own answers, and I mean, there's a lot of overlap between what they say and what I'm gonna say, because some of it's just fact. I'm gonna talk about my experience, and I somehow have to do this in 27 minutes. So buckle in, because we're gonna go speedy quick. If you would like a emotional support beverage as you watch this video, I highly encourage, because it just life's better with a beverage. Okay, so first question. What is schizophrenia? A lot of people right off the cuff think that schizophrenia means having a dual personality, but that's not what it means at all, actually. That is multiple personality disorder, totally different thing. There's a wide degree of what the illness can look like, but generally it's classified as having a number of very specific kinds of symptoms. I moved so the focus went out. You have your positive delusions, you have your negative symptoms, and it's been a while since I've taken a test on this. And then there's another category of symptoms, like your traditional kind of, you know, classic sort of examples of symptoms, which are hallucinations. Hallucinations can be on any of your senses. It can be touch, sight, sound, smell, taste. You also have delusions, which I know is like super trendy online right now to be freaking delulu, but I'm telling you, but there is a huge difference between, you know, having a wild idea or a wild ambitious idea and then being actually delusional. There's a very significant difference, and I don't think it's something really to joke about, because when you're in an actual delusional space, you 100% are in the story. You believe everything you think it's real, and sometimes it's a very scary experience. So for myself. This is just a silly example that I like to share, but I, one time while I was in the hospital, had a delusion that I was pregnant with a frog. And I give this example all the time because it's something that everybody can understand is just not humanly possible. You cannot get pregnant with a frog. The science doesn't science. Anyway, it's so ludicrous, but the reason why my brain accepted this was because I was ill, and now that I am well and in a recovered state, I understand that this is a delusion and not real. But when I'm unmedicated and not taking care of my well-being, my brain kind of goes awry and will just start believing these things. And so, and then you also feel the emotions and you behave as though it's actually happening. So like I, had thoughts like, oh, this is going to be so weird. Everybody's going to think, I'm a freak because this just never happened before and this shouldn't happen. And, la, la, la. And, walking around with my hand on my stomach thinking like, wow, what am I going to do? And feeling a connection to this frog. And it's like, it's really kind of baffling how real it feels and how your brain just buys into the experience. And you don't have a choice whether or not to accept it. That's the thing. It's because it's like part of your subconscious almost. It's really interesting. Anyway, schizophrenia is actually a thought disorder. So yeah, like there's definitely emotional components to it, but it's a disorder of your thought process is where it actually comes from. But then there's another category of symptoms, which is your negative symptoms. So this is like reduced motivation, which is a very valid symptom because it's not like your typical lack of motivation where, you like went for a run that day and now you're sore and you want to take a break, and rightfully so, you should rest. But you just have a lack of motivation that way because you're burnt out. It's like, it kind of mirrors depression, but it's also like this sort of existential dread feeling where I guess it varies too, but for me, I had this like existential feeling of like dread where I just like could not do anything, and the physical weight that I felt on my being just having to do regular life stuff. Like, and then the other thing too is there's also cognitive symptoms, which I also experience. Cognitive symptoms is like not being able to read or like write a proper sentence or do any simple basic math or any, exercise that involves like cognitive functioning. And yeah, so it's honestly like it's a hell of an experience, dude, and it really grinds my gears sometimes when it gets a stigma of being like people with this experience are risky to be around or yada yada yada. But and like yeah, it's definitely it doesn't make sense, and that's why it's so unpredictable and it feels scary, and it is scary. But it's not that the person is scary, it's that the experience is scary. And depending on the delusions, like it can be very sensitive topics in nature, and no one with this illness wants this illness, and no one with this illness brought it on themselves. Okay, I don't care if you went into a drug-induced psychosis, I don't care if you had a stressful experience, I don't care like where it came from. People take mushrooms all the time to put themselves into a hallucinogenic state. But the thing is their brain has the capability to rebound after that and regulate the dopamine again in their brain, and so they can be back to normal, like their normal self, with like the enlightenment of the experience. But someone with my brain cannot do that. If I took a high dose of mushrooms, my dopamine receptors would be so freaking out of whack and not knowing what to do with itself that it starts to create meaning in areas where meaning does not exist. And that is essentially what the illness does. I know that was a really long-winded answer for the first question. I've been talking for 13 minutes. Oh my god. But I hope my goal with this video is to just share a very personal and humanistic perspective, because I feel like there's obviously a lot of division, and you know, it's a very sensitive time to be alive, to be quite honest. And I think sometimes people with the illness that I have, or that we have, I should say, if you're watching this and you have the illness, we kind of, I've definitely felt like I've definitely felt like this is the worst possible thing that could ever happen to me. And I had fears about it happening to me before it happened, because I had heard rumor of it running in my family and stuff. Okay, question 2. What is psychosis? So psychosis is basically a episode of what schizophrenia is long term. So for example, I had to have 3 psychosis episodes before I got my big name diagnosis. Okay. But yeah, so psychosis is it's a window of time with the abstract experience, I'll say. So it's just a period of time. And sometimes with a psychosis you can be on medication for the rest of your life, and sometimes you don't necessarily have to be. Schizophrenia is essentially chronic psychosis, as far as what I've learned. So not that there's really an on and an off switch for the whole thing, but anyway. Why is early intervention so important? Question 3. Why is early intervention so important? Early intervention is so important because the earlier you are to get diagnosed with your first psychosis, or if you get diagnosed with schizophrenia right off the bat, that's could be possible too. But the earlier you get a diagnosis, the more likely you are to recover. So for myself, I feel very fortunate that I was diagnosed at 17, because, so twofold. So first, because I was able to get on medication sooner and allow my brain to heal sooner, and I could have gone on way longer without having a diagnosis if I wasn't if I didn't have an episode early on. But also, I've had 3 episodes, and my last one was probably the hardest one, but I will say I did feel the most capable of getting through it because I had already done it twice and I kind of knew what to expect in the back of my mind. Even though in the initial stages, while I was first going through the experience, I didn't know what was happening and blah blah blah. But once I was back on medication and my brain started to heal, I started to gain some clarity, and I realized that the same things that I started to realize the first 2 times. So the first time was totally rogue. I didn't know what was happening, and I got to a recovery state, but it wasn't ideal because I wasn't on the right medication yet, and yada yada yada. But by the 3rd time I kind of knew okay, my brain is starting to heal after I gained some clarity, and I started to be able to detect okay, I think this is a delusion, or I think this is a hallucination, and I started to be able to recognize my symptoms and have awareness in a way, whereas the first time I went through it, I didn't have that awareness. I was just going through it for the first time, so it was a novel experience. I realized why I kept going in and out. It's because I had the wrong focus point on. Good job, Hannah. She's a professional photographer, everybody. But video? Nope. Okay, anyway. So the earlier you get diagnosed, honestly, the better, because the more time you get to become familiar with the illness, the sooner you can get better, essentially. Okay, so this is a big question. So number 4 is, how do I get help? So the best way to get help, what is happening in your brain is a lot of things, but your dopamine is not being regulated. Little things can help for sure, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of little practices I do that help me maintain my wellness, like doing exercise and eating in a balanced, or as balanced as you can, meditation and therapy and having a good support system. Those are all exceptionally important things. But the crux of the matter is, for this illness, in my personal experience, I could not function without my medication. And I could have like all these other pieces in place. I don't know really if I'd be able to function. Guaranteed, I will say there has been a lot of research that I've been interested in about the keto diet, which I'm not going to go into because it's still pretty controversial. But there is some research that a ketogenic diet can be beneficial for people with my illness. But you still, like, that's still under doctor supervision. And like my biggest thing would be to say, get a doctor, get a psychiatrist. Just do what you have to do to get a doctor, because you need a support team that is going to stay with you on this course and help you manage this journey. If you can get a therapist, that's also great. I know it's hard to be in therapy sometimes when your thoughts don't make sense, and probably this would come like a little bit later down the road, but you need someone that you can talk to. And it's okay if you don't make sense, because sometimes you just need to like get the thoughts out to process. My other thing would say is journaling was one of my greatest tools for my own personal growth and development. And I learned this while I was working. So one helpful tip that I picked up is, if you're having delusions, hallucinations, and a lot of times people still have like their own voice in their head, which was my experience. You would essentially get 3 different color pens, and you would take like a green pen and write those in write your own thoughts in that color, and then you take a blue pen and write your delusions in that color, and then you take a red pen and write your hallucinations in that color. And you don't even really have to read it back in the first, like, as you're like writing it. It doesn't have to make sense whatsoever, and it probably won't, to be honest. But yeah, and then gradually over time, as you're taking the medication, as you're, focusing on your recovery, as you're practicing well-being and whatever, your brain is going to heal, and your thoughts are going to start to change and make more sense down the road, and eventually you'll get to the point where you can just write in a black pen or blue pen or whatever, because they'll just start to make sense again, and you won't need that differentiation. And what I will say also is that not everybody gets into a place where their baseline is, just their own voice in their head again, or just like a quiet brain again. Some people will always hear voices, and that's okay. Some people will always have hallucinations, and that's okay. And some people will always have delusions, and that's also okay. But there's a difference between being a part of them and witnessing them as a part of your experience. Yeah, and I mean, meditation has also helped me a lot with that. So yeah, so another thing I recommend. But my biggest thing is, if you detect some symptoms or signs in yourself or someone else, please reach out to a medical professional that can help you navigate this whole wild experience, because you just can't do it alone. I can't tell you how many times I tried to do this alone, and I just couldn't. I eventually had to give in and let people help me, sometimes against my own will, and it's just easier if you go willingly. That's all I'm gonna say. Why are medications so important is question number 5. Why are medications so important? Medications are not perfect, but they are really important, and that's because mean, do I really need to go into it? Like, it just, like, it helps your brain on a chemical level. Like, yes, do I think my brain is, chemicals are unbalanced when I'm in a psychotic state? Absolutely. But do I think that is the reason why? No, I think it's because of my metabolic health. But that's a separate conversation for another day. And obviously, like, just as a disclaimer, this video is, like, all based on my opinion, like, given my experience, given my experience having this illness. I'm 30, I'm gonna be 31 since I was 17, and also, like, working with people, and the copious amounts of, like, research and reading I've done on this topic. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of it, but I will say, like, my experience is not your experience, so talk to a freaking doctor. And also, the other thing I'll say is you are the expert of your own experience, and I am the expert of my own experience. So if you are on a medication and it doesn't feel right, if you feel like it just doesn't feel like your normal self, like, and with the caveat of you're never going to go back to how you were before you were in psychosis. That person of you no longer exists. That version of you no longer exists. You can be a new version of yourself that is recovered and that is in a wellness state, but you can't ever go back to who you were before. It's just, you can't. It's gone. So if you're on a medication and it doesn't feel right for you, please tell your doctor, because that was my experience. I started when I was 17 on a medication and I didn't like it. It made me feel so like exhausted and hard to move, and I ended up switching medications a year later, and this medication has saved my life. So if you have that gut feeling, like, obviously listen to your doctor, but yeah, please do express that, because just because the first medication you try might not be the right one. Apparently my therapy appointment is until 3:15, which I didn't know. So I'm gonna keep going for a few minutes anyway. So the last question I answered was, why are medications important? And basically, medications are important because it deals with the illness on a very fundamental level. It just can tackle it in a way that nothing else can, I think. And I mean, again, there's been a lot of new research with the ketogenic diet and things like that that really interests me, and maybe we'll see a lot of new research in the next, couple of decades. And I would love that. I would honestly love if there was a way that I didn't need to, get a needle every month. Or take medication. I have no qualms taking medication. I think I need it. It's helping me stay well. And it's kind of like that Taylor Tomlinson. I don't know if you've ever seen that clip from her Netflix special, but it's like your little arm floaties. It helps me stay afloat while I swim in the lake, or the ocean, I guess. So medication is very important. Question number 6 is, why has my loved one stopped taking their medication? A lot of the time, and I have experienced this even for myself, when just before an episode is about to strike, or something might be off with the individual I'm referring to myself, that is making them, is starting to change their thoughts. And we have to remember that schizophrenia is a thought disorder, so when your thoughts pattern starts to change, that's the first sign that something is kind of up. A lot of people believe that, kind of like I mentioned earlier, that once you start to feel better, you've been taking medication for so long, it feels like you should be okay. Or maybe it feels like you are okay, and that you can kind of start to wean off. But in my experience, that's the first, for me, I was just opening the door into another episode. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest reason I've heard over the years. But there's a lot of other reasons why people stop taking their medication. A lot of these heavy antipsychotics make people feel really groggy and weighed down and heavy and tired and not motivated. And there's a lot of some of them are risky medications to take. Some of them make you feel like a zombie, and I can understand someone not wanting to take medication for those purposes either. But the best way to support someone who has stopped taking their medication is really just to listen to why they have stopped, what is causing that, because every action has a motivation, and people don't stop taking their medication, especially if it was working well for them, if there wasn't a very concrete reason. So yeah, the best way to support someone through it is listen, and then just like get them to a professional who can kind of help them suss out the medication piece. Yeah, it's not wrong to stop taking medication, it's just risky sometimes. But yeah, so question number seven, how can I tell the difference between symptoms versus side effects? That's a great question. I would say, for me, how I tell the difference is, first thing is your medical professional should give you a list of symptoms to look for. I mean, not a symptom, a side effects. The difference between a symptom and a side effect. A symptom is something that is happening to your brain, and it will usually look like a thought gone sideways. So like, be like, you'll have a delusion, and like, for example, one of my delusions was, I thought after Mac Miller passed away, which, rest in peace, after he passed away, I thought he was actually not passed, and I believed he was like living in outer space in like a spaceship with like all my favorite like musicians, famous celebrity musicians, and I thought it was in 2020, so it was a weird time to be alive, but yeah, and this is like very grandiose kind of delusion. A hallucination is like, so off the same kind of delusion, I had a hallucination kind of based on it, and basically I saw the ghost of Biggie Smalls in my bathtub. He kind of looked like a genie, like the genie from Aladdin, but it was Biggie Smalls, and I was in the bathtub, and I saw him floating above me. Side effects are things that you will be warned about, like that you'll have kind of a guide of what to look for, and it's per medication also. Whereas symptoms like are a part of the illness, and once you start taking medication pretty regularly, you'll notice some of the symptoms start to like draw back, and you won't be hearing as many voices, or you won't have as many delusions, or you'll be able to say like, oh no, I think that was a delusion, Whereas side effects you didn't have before you start taking the medication, and you might experience after you start taking the medication, and you can also Google what side effects for specific medications are. But I wouldn't say, like, to me a side effect has to be pretty strong to not take the medication, because to me the medication's so worth it. But I do experience a little bit of like fatigue, but not as much as other medications I've taken, and it's mostly for me the biggest thing is I get like burnt out quickly, where like if I am working for a long period of time without taking breaks, or even if I do take breaks, I just like feel very like tired and overwhelmed and depleted. So I just need to be conscious of that. And last question number 8. Are there different types of side effects? Yes, there are. There's all kinds of side effects. I'm not going to list them because it's like different, and it pertains to which kind of medication you're on, which I can only speak to the kinds of medications that I've been on. But I would just say talk to your doctor on that. If there's a particular side effect that you're concerned about, let your doctor know about that in advance. while I was in the hospital for my last episode, I was actually refusing to take my medication as an injection, which I had been doing for like 10 years, because I was afraid it was going to make me gain weight again after I had lost a bunch, because usually when I'm unwell I lose a bunch of weight. But I ended up going back on it, and I did gain a bunch of weight, but I've determined that I would rather be the size I am right now and be able to mentally function and be able to hold a conversation, be able to read a book, be able to enjoy my life, than be unwell and be smaller. So anyway, just my 2 cents on the topic. And that is all the questions I have for today, friend. So yeah, I will link this article that I'm pulling the questions from in the description. This one's actually from the Schizophrenia Society, I think, of Saskatchewan, which I think they probably have a similar version on every SSS website. But yeah, I'll link this, and so you can see their answers if you would like to. Otherwise, I will let you go here. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for staying to the end if you did, and smash that like button if you would like to see another video like this or something similar. Hit the subscribe if you want to see more from me, and leave a comment if you have a question or have a question that you'd like me to answer in a future video. Thanks so much for being here. Love you so much. Take care. Bye-bye. See you next time. And